One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Have you ever met someone, a complete stranger, right? Someone that is brand new to you, and you're asked to take off your clothes, put on a robe, or get under a sheet? Yes, y'all, I am talking about getting a massage. Where is your mind going? Okay, let's just clear that up real fast. I am talking about getting a massage. And the reason why this is top of mind for me is because we went a few months back to Mexico. My husband and I went for our 10-year anniversary, and I told him, I was like, the only thing I want to do is go get a massage. It is one of those things that I love so much. And because of the pandemic and everything going on, I hadn't had one in about 2 years. And I was like, oh my gosh, it would be so fantastic just to get a massage. But when I was in there, and I've gotten massages for, on and off throughout my life, so it wasn't new to me that I knew the routine. I knew what was expected. I know that you go to the spa, you get undressed, they give you a robe, like the whole thing. I'm comfortable with it. I know what happens. But for whatever reason, this year, this particular time, I thought, what a vulnerable thing to do, right? Like you meet this person within 5 minutes of meeting them, and then you're in the most vulnerable state of your life, right? Well, the reason I'm bringing this up today is because that's kind of what it feels like when you get a podcast audit. It feels very unnerving. It's like opening up your bank account and showing everybody your books, right? I don't know if you've ever hired an accountant or someone to look at what is actually going on in your finances. It's also a very vulnerable place to be. And so I'm approaching having a podcast audit with the same gentleness, the same kind of slow approach, because I know it's a little uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to talk about your numbers. It's uncomfortable to talk about your audience size or how many downloads you have or how big your email list is or how many website visitors, or if you don't have a website because you can't afford one because you're like, I don't know if I'm actually going to take this podcasting thing seriously. Like, I've heard all of the different scenarios. And so today I wanted to specifically shine the light on why you need a podcast audit and how it could benefit you. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? So I'm a big fan of getting feedback. It comes from my marketing background. I know I've shared this here before, but in college, whenever I was taking kind of like the introduction to marketing classes, it was like, oh, marketing 101, sales 101, and all those things. One of the classes I had to take was market research. Y'all, this is really, really where my nerdiness exploded. I fell in love with the idea of understanding statistics and how to ask good questions and getting feedback. And, if you ever see the surveys that people do, or even, recently I shared about the Nielsen insights about podcasting, like that stuff just gets me so fired up because I love to understand the bigger general population about how my information compares. And so today, what we're talking about is kind of taking that same approach, but spinning it on your own podcast. Because when it comes to having a podcast audit, what I'm typically talking about is someone else that listens to your show and goes above and beyond the good job. Yes, it's nice. You don't sound dumb. Or sure, this is fantastic, honey, coming from your mom or your significant other, right? We've all been there. We don't know who else to ask. So we just ask someone that's close to us. It's a friend, it's a family member, it's a coworker. And you're just like, hey, will you listen to my podcast and tell me what you think? And they typically will say, oh yeah, it's fine. It's good. But maybe it's about something they have no interest in. Maybe you do a cooking podcast, right? It's all for chefs or people that want to get real fancy. It's the foodies that you're just like, oh my gosh, like this is the people that want to travel the world and eat all the different types of cuisines. But if you ask someone that eats ramen noodles for dinner and could care, like ramen noodles and cereal is like their bread and butter, right? They're like, they don't really adventure out to food stuff. They're probably not going to care about what your podcast is about, or they may not be as passionate about it, or they may say, sure, sounds good. Sounds good. No, you need a much better perspective than that. And honestly, you just need an outsider's perspective when you're way too in the weeds. So if you are a solo podcaster, or if it's you and your co-host and you are just constantly in the weeds of planning the content, recording the content, marketing the content, you may be too much in your own head and you need an outsider's perspective. You need the fresh eyes and maybe new questions, right? This is something, again, going back to my market research class, it's all in the questions of what you're asked. So, or what you're asking the people that you want to get feedback from, right? So if I just say, is this good? It's going to be a yes or no. Instead of saying, what was the number one takeaway you had from that episode? Or what do you think that episode was really about? Or could you describe to me how you felt after that episode? Or tell me a little bit more about what else you would want to hear. These are much better questions that you can ask to your more general audience, but it's also something that if you're having someone look at your show, these are the type of questions you need to ask. Not, is it good? Because you're going to get a yes or no. And then it's like, oh, thanks. It's not really constructive feedback that's going to help you get better. And there are always those loose ends. Y'all, I'm so guilty of this, where we say, oh, I was going to tie those things up, but I haven't gotten around to it. I'm not going to lie. Okay, this is like true confessions of the podcast procrastinator. Ooh, I think I just came up with a new segment. I like it. I'm going to write that one down. True confessions of the podcast procrastinator. There is one specific task in my Asana project plan that I have moved the deadline, the due date for this task. I've changed it like 5 times. I think the first time was in September of 2021. Y'all, it's now January of 2022 when I'm recording this, and I have moved it yet again, I believe, to Q2 of this year because it's something I need to do, but I haven't done it yet. Well, there's some things like that you have in your podcast that you're just like, oh yeah, I was going to update my category, but I just never did. I was going to go back and change my podcast artwork, but I just keep forgetting to. Or I was going to go and put some more keywords in my podcast description, but it just hasn't happened yet. I get it. There's always those loose ends, but coming back around to why you need a podcast audit, you need someone to have those fresh eyes on your show. And this is something that I did a lot. Pretty much in the first half of 2021, I conducted a lot of podcast audits for free for people in our community, and I learned so much. I learned so much about podcasters, not just in the sense of what they were struggling with and where I could help them, but more of the internal feeling, emotional part behind their show and where they were struggling. So I actually wanted to read some of the reasons why these podcasters were submitting to have their podcast audited. So if you aren't familiar with how we did these, I basically just put a call to action in our weekly live sessions. I said, hey, we're going to do these monthly audits. Go to this link and fill out the Google form and tell us why you want to be audited. And they were like, hey, give us your name, your email, what your podcast is about. They submitted either an audio clip or their artwork, like whatever it is that they wanted feedback on. They submitted it all. But one of the things, and this is where my market research nerdiness comes back in, I really wanted to know why. Like, why did they want me to look at their podcast? I knew that there was a reason. And so I pulled up this Google form in preparing for this, this episode today, y'all. I'm laughing at myself because I'm also a digital hoarder. Not only am I a podcast procrastinator, I'm a digital hoarder, and it paid off. It paid off in the best way possible because I still had everything from this podcast audit, and I am so grateful that I get to read these here to you today. So all these are anonymous, but I wanted to read. The question was, why are you submitting to have your podcast audited? Okay, that was a question that I asked. And here are some of the answers. I struggle with an intro and outro, and when I listen back, it sounds too scripted and boring. Ooh, like y'all, these are like real honest. So I just want to say thank y'all for if you got your podcast audited last year, if any of these are you, thank you so much for being so honest, because I think that you're helping other people in realizing why they may need to get their podcast audited too. Okay. So there's way more that are really, really honest. The next one is, I'm seeing a steady decline in my listeners. I'm seeing some very loyal listeners and have good engagement, but the number of listeners is decreasing. I want to get better at my podcasting skill. I absolutely respect your podcasting model, and I want to learn more about good content and marketing. Again, a very good one. They're talking about, I have seen a steady decline in listenership. They have some really loyal listeners and good engagement, but the number of listeners are decreasing. So I have so many follow-up questions, right? We're not going to get into all of my follow-up questions. I'm just going to keep reading why these people wanted to have their podcast audited. So the next one is, it would be great to have an expert eye and ear look and listen. That was another one. The next one is my organic growth is slow. I would love some honest feedback. Now, this is one, and I want to bring this up because this actually comes up more than once, but organic growth. I have lots of ideas around organic growth. What that means is you are not paying to have people come to your podcast, right? That is what organic growth means to me. And it's where you heavily invest in titling your podcast episodes, titling your podcast, having the right keywords, doing show notes that have really good SEO. Like, this is how organic growth happens. And I'm going to tell you, it's not an overnight success thing. Organic SEO and getting like ranking on Google and getting your podcast to show up in search engines, it takes time. So I just want to give like whoever was submitting to have their podcast audited and they're like, man, my organic growth is slow. It's not supposed to be fast. And this is where patience really comes in. And I'm going to be really honest. It's where I get really frustrated, not with podcasters. I get frustrated with someone telling me I have to be patient. So if you're like, oh my God, Crystal, that's me. I'm not patient. Me neither. Me neither. I have to pray for patience all the time in so many different areas of my life. And in my business, like it's one of those things you have to be patient because organic growth isn't going to happen overnight. So I wanted to make that really, really clear. Whoever submitted this, my organic growth is slow. I'd love some honest feedback. It's not going to be fast, but it is going to be effective. I can tell you that right now. Okay, here's another one. Somebody said they hit episode 40 today and I have very few downloads and followers. I would love to see this number rise. So I see this a lot too, where podcasters, we all love the idea of just get started, right? We all have to start somewhere, just get going. You can always improve and get better later. But then there's people that fall into this kind of lost podcasters category of I got started, I was scrappy, I did it. Did I do it right? Am I on the right track? I haven't had anybody give me an outsider's perspective. I just keep putting, like, I'm being consistent, Crystal. You told me to be consistent. I'm putting it out there, but I don't know if I'm doing it right. So if this is you, if you've hit that episode 40, if you've hit that episode 20, if you've hit that episode 7, and you're just like, I don't really know that I'm doing this all correctly, well, then just keep listening, okay? Just keep listening. I have something really cool to share with you here in a second, but I want to share more about why you should have a podcast audit. Somebody else says, hopefully to be able to improve the way I connect with my audience. Obviously, we all want to grow, but I want to create quality content that is easy to digest no matter who you are. Whoever this person is, like, you are a creator after my own heart. This is exactly the type of podcaster that I want to serve because they're trying to make it about more than just the downloads, right? Like it is way more than just the numbers that you see of your statistics and the downloads and the listeners and the countries that people like all those things. Like, those are actually people. Those are people listening to your podcast. And they're saying, I want to create quality content that is easy to digest no matter who you are. So that was just an awesome one. I really wanted to make sure and highlight that one. And the next one is, I have no idea what I'm doing. I was just winging it and made a podcast one day out of nowhere. Bless you. Whoever wrote this one in, I love the pure honesty in why they wanted to have their they're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I just got started. I'm winging it. I just started it one day out of nowhere. And I was just like, yes, yes, yes. Because this is what we have to do sometimes. You're like, you know what? If I want to get this done, I just got to throw it up and get it out there. And okay, now I've been doing it, but I want to get better at it. Okay, if you're listening, you're like, oh my gosh, that is me. Keep listening, because I have some more that I think you're really going to enjoy. The next one is just looking for areas of improvement. Simple. I think that's a great reason to have a podcast audit. The next one is to get additional tips for me for being a better podcaster. Also, get a little validation that I'm headed in the right direction. So this one is kind of like a two-header where it's really helpful to get that outside perspective, but it's also great to get your audience perspective. So not just all of the people that are listening to your podcast. I think you should do an audience survey. We actually have a podcast episode I'll link to that's all about, understanding your listener, getting listener feedback. But I think it's also important to get some validation that you are headed in the right direction. Because if you've never had that, you could be going in a loop-de-loop in an area that you just don't know that you want to head that down or down that path. And you may not know until you get so far gone that you're like, man, how do I backtrack? Do I need to rebrand my whole thing? Do I need to just stop this podcast and start a brand new one? And this is what you would get if you had a podcast audit and had someone really look at all the different opportunities and angles that you can approach your podcast. Okay, I'm only going to read a few more. I know you're like, Crystal, oh my gosh, how many of these? These were just so good. I had to share them. The next one is, I just want to know if my target audience is narrow enough and if my content connects to them the way I hope it does. I also would love some direction with my branding. So this is another podcaster after my own heart, because if you are talking to a very general, a very broad audience, it's really hard to understand if you're hitting the mark on the right people. Or if it's too specific, or not too specific, too broad, then it's hard for someone to look at that and say, oh, that's for me. Here's a great example. If you say, oh, well, I have a parenting podcast.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
Okay. Is that parenting for single moms? Is it parenting for people that are, divorced and they're co-parenting? Is it for parenting adoptive children? Is it for parenting special needs children? Is it for parenting, kids that are like, you're an expat and you're raising kids internationally and you're trying to raise them culturally with the best of both worlds? Like, what type of parenting are you doing? Then you do need to get a little bit more specific. You do need to narrow it down. And I love the question about branding. I always love giving feedback on branding because it's really easy to look at your own stuff and think that it's perceived one way, but then you get an outsider's perspective and you're like, oh, I never thought of it that way. Or because you have your own, I guess, what's the right word? Like, the perspective that you're trying to put out to the world. Right? The internal message that you want your website to say or you want your social media to say. But if you don't explicitly say it, or if someone can't see that, if you're like, oh, well, I put all these creative pictures up because I want people to think I'm creative, but really you kind of look at them, somebody else does, and they're like, these pictures are kind of creepy. You're actually creeping me out with these little weird pictures, it's just, branding is a whole thing. It's like a whole nother conversation that we'll have to have another day. But branding is very, very important when it comes to your podcast. All right, I only have a few more. I would like feedback as far as structure, appeal, if there's a connection with my audience, and how likely people are to check back in. So again, this is where the double header comes in, where you could benefit from having feedback from an expert, but also feedback from your audience, the people that are currently listening to your show. So when it comes to structure and appeal, this may vary. Like, I don't even know that I could tell you, you need to be like X, Y, Z, because I am not someone that believes there's a perfect template for a podcast. I was in the Buzzsprout group the other day, and somebody asked the question, like, what is the perfect length for a podcast episode? And then somebody else asked, like, what do you typically listen to when it comes to a podcast? This was on a different Facebook post. And it was funny because I chimed in. I was like, well, as a podcast expert, there are no rules. There were multiple people that were like, thank you so much for saying that. Because if somebody comes up to me and says, if your podcast is longer than 20 minutes and 17 seconds, it's going to fail. Or if it's shorter than 2 hours and 34 minutes and 23 seconds, it's going to fail. I'm going to laugh in their face. And I'm going to say, actually, no, that's not true at all, because I can give you boom, 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 XYZ examples of how you're wrong. So when it comes to structure, appeal, all those things, it's all subjective, but it's going to be different for every single podcast. I don't think there's a perfect template. If somebody tells you that there is, please run in the other direction, okay? It's your show. You can do whatever you want with it. But when it comes to connection and how likely people are to check back in, that's when I would really focus on how you can connect with your podcast audience, the people that are currently listening to your show, and get that direct feedback from them. Okay, two more, guys. I know I just can't help it. These were just so fascinating to me, why people wanted their podcast audited. So this one was short and simple. Always trying to get better results in the search engines. So again, SEO, search engine results, all of those, it takes time. It takes time. And when I say that, I don't mean it takes a month. I'm saying it could take 3 to 12 months to really get results, depending on how often you're publishing content. If you're publishing one podcast episode a month and you're hoping to rank in Google, I mean, like, that's a shot in the dark. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but that's going to be really difficult to make that happen. So have some patience. I know it's the word we don't want to use, but we got to have some patience when it comes to search engine results and organic growth, okay? And then the last one I want to share with you. I feel comfortable with my show, but I've never gotten an outsider's perspective who is actively a podcaster. So again, this is going back to the model of, if you ask your friends and your family, how am I doing? Is this show good? They're going to give you a sure, yeah, because they don't know what to look for. They don't, unless you specifically say, hey, listen to this audio file. Tell me, is it too loud? Do you hear any weird background noises? Is it too echoey? Do I sound muffled? Am I too loud in certain places? Or do you hear the audio drop? Like, you have to ask really, really specific questions. And I can speak from experience. When you talk to people that are not into podcasting, their eyes glaze over or their eyes roll to the back of their head, and they're just like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't listen to podcasts. So yeah, I don't do anything audio. That's a problem. That's not who you need to ask for feedback on your podcast. But those are, and there were 13 altogether. So I just read you 13 reasons why people in our podcast community have asked to have their podcast audited. And there were so many more. I think I had at least 20 or 30 submissions for podcast audits last year. And it's something that I don't even offer for free anymore. But like I said, I learned so much in doing these. And I know that it is a very valuable thing to have for podcasters that haven't seen much growth, that aren't sure that they are headed in the right direction, or that need some help with their branding or their marketing or their strategies or collaborations or approaches to growing their audience. Which is why This is something that we recently added to our brand new program, the Potty People Co-op. So if you're listening to this in real time, the doors have just opened. Enrollment is open for the Potty People Co-op from January 18th through January 24th, 2022. And this is something that I'm so excited to offer. So what you're getting when you enroll in this program is an expert level podcast audit. And it's actually above and beyond what I did in our free version of this, because the free version was like, I spent 5 minutes looking at your stuff. I read your information that you submitted in the Google form. And then I showed you like, hey, this is where you can improve. Okay, next, like I have to move on to the next one. With these, I am combing through the nooks and the crannies, like every single corner of your podcast. I'm going to look at your SEO. I'm going to take a look at keywords. I'm going to do some deep dive research on your topic, on the information that you submit to me, because I want to help you get better. I want you to not to feel so frustrated, I got tongue-tied there, with your podcast growth. If things have started to flatline or stagnate, I want you to think about what a podcast audit could look like for you. Do you need some of this branding feedback? Do you need like, hey, am I on the right track? I'm working on SEO. Am I doing this correctly? And all of those things and more are just one of the things that you get whenever you enroll in the Potty People Co-op. You also get a one-on-one coaching session with me, and that is outside of our 6-week group coaching sessions. So that is really the bulk of the program. Is we're going to have 6 weeks of group coaching where you're going to be surrounded by other motivated podcasters that are looking to grow their show. So if you've been looking for an accountability buddy, I would love to see you in the Potty People Co-op and find that person that's going to help keep you motivated and inspired to keep going on your podcast journey. So if you've never seen one of the live podcast audits that I did in 2021, I'm going to link in the show notes to a recent YouTube video where I shared all about what a podcast audit is. And I included an example of a clip that I did. All like you can see what happens in a really basic version of a podcast audit. And I want you to see how every podcaster can benefit from having an expert look at their information, look at what you're doing, get a fresh perspective and fresh eyes and ears on the content that you're already creating. So I want you to go to thepottypeople.com if you are ready to register. Again, the enrollment is only open from January 18th through January 24th, 2022. And if you're like, oh my gosh, this sounds amazing, I would love to see you in the program. But if you're still not sure, if you're like, I don't know that I'm ready to enroll, make sure you are signed up for our free training. It's all about 4 reasons your podcast isn't growing and what to do about it. So attend this free training. It's crystalprofit.com/training, and you're going to learn more about the reasons why your podcast may not be growing. If you're just like, man, I just really haven't seen anything change in the last 6 months, you need to save your seat in this training. We're going to have 3 different times that it's offered live, and it's going to be really helpful for you to get your specific podcast questions answered. And I would just love to see you there. I mean, I'm going to brag. I was going to say I'm not going to brag, but I am going to brag. I have the best Q&A sessions. I love them. If you've ever attended one of my weekly live streams, I love answering your questions. It helps me understand this community even better, but it's also just so much fun to see one person has a question and then 5 other people can benefit from that specific question. That's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the group coaching that we're going to have in the Potty People Co-op. But let me tell you the show notes for this episode. crystalprofit.com/episode 324. It's where you're going to find the link to the podcast audit that I did last year. That's going to be really, really helpful for you to understand what a podcast audit is and how you can benefit from it. But I hope you enjoyed this today. I mean, it was so much fun to really share about why other podcasters have wanted to have their show looked at, because it's above and beyond, is this good, right? It's such a open, closed question. I want you to think even deeper about it. Like, why would you want your podcast audited? Is there something specific that immediately comes to mind when I ask, do you want your podcast audited and why? Hopefully you're already thinking of something. You're like, yeah, I really want to ask you this question. If you do, make sure that you join us in our free training, 4 reasons your podcast isn't growing and what to do about it. That way we can get your questions answered. But again, the show notes for today's episode are crystalprofit.com/episode 324. And that's all I have for you. So as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.